Let's be honest. Nothing stings quite like being dismissed, overlooked, or taken for granted by someone you gave your heart to. And while your first instinct might be to fight for closure or prove your worth, the most powerful response you can give is silence, growth, and indifference. This isn't about playing games. It's about reclaiming your energy, rebuilding your confidence, and showing him, without a single word, that the biggest mistake he made was losing you. Silence is often misunderstood in the aftermath of a breakup. Many people believe that in order to be heard, they have to speak louder, send one more message, or make their presence felt. But in reality, silence is one of the most powerful tools you have when someone has taken you for granted. Choosing silence doesn't mean weakness. It means control. It means you value your peace more than trying to convince someone of your worth. When you fall silent after a breakup, especially when you've been hurt, you send a clear message. I no longer need to explain myself to you. And that message echoes louder than any emotional outburst ever could. People are drawn to energy. When you're constantly texting, calling, or reacting to his social media, you're giving him a steady stream of emotional energy. You may not even realize it, but every time you reach out, even just to vent, you're feeding the connection. You're keeping yourself on his mental radar, but not in the way you want. You're making yourself predictable, accessible, and worse, desperate for a response. But when you fall silent, completely silent, something shifts. Suddenly, your energy is no longer available. The chase reverses. The comfort of knowing you'll always be there disappears. That's when curiosity kicks in. That's when he starts to notice the void your absence leaves. There's a difference between healthy communication and chasing someone who no longer values you. Silence is what separates the two. It's the moment you take your power back, not by demanding answers, but by withdrawing your attention. You stop playing the emotional tug of war and let go of the rope entirely. In doing so, you give yourself space to breathe and heal, while also disrupting the pattern that allowed him to take you for granted in the first place. It's not about manipulating him into missing you. It's about removing yourself from a dynamic that didn't serve your self-respect. Silence also gives you clarity. When you're constantly reacting, your thoughts are cluttered with emotion and obsession over what he's thinking, doing, or feeling. But the moment you step back into silence, you begin to hear your own voice again. You start to recognize how drained you felt trying to hold on to someone who didn't make you feel secure. You see the parts of yourself you overlooked while prioritizing his needs and his approval. Silence doesn't just protect your dignity, it rebuilds it. It creates room for you to reconnect with who you are without the noise of someone else's indifference clouding your vision. From his side, silence can become deafening. He might have expected you to keep chasing, to keep trying, because that's the version of you he became comfortable with. When that changes, when your name stops popping up on his phone, when you stop watching his stories, when your energy vanishes from his life, it disrupts his sense of control. It forces him to question whether he misjudged your attachment. And if he had any real feelings for you at all, that silence will make him uneasy. It creates a space where regret can take root. The longer that silence lingers, the more he is left to reflect on your absence rather than dismiss it. This isn't about playing games. Silence isn't about waiting for him to miss you and come crawling back. It's about choosing yourself. It's about preserving your dignity when someone else failed to protect it. And if he does regret losing you, that's his journey, not your responsibility. But that regret will never happen while you're still making noise in his life. Silence is what forces him to sit with the consequences of his choices. It's the unexpected absence that suddenly reveals the weight of your presence. And that, more than any speech or final text, is what makes him feel the loss. When a relationship ends, it's easy to get stuck in the mental loop of what could have been. You replay old conversations, reread messages, scroll through pictures, and analyze every detail, trying to make sense of where things went wrong. In doing so, you're not just mourning the loss, you're holding on to a fantasy, a version of him that you created in your mind. A version that, if you're honest with yourself, never fully matched the reality of who he actually was. The danger of this fantasy is that it becomes addictive. You start missing not the person he truly was, but the potential you believed he had, the promises he never followed through on, the moments that were sweet enough to overshadow the rest. But the truth is, living in that fantasy delays your healing and makes it nearly impossible to move forward. Feeding the fantasy keeps you emotionally tied to someone who is no longer showing up for you. It's a quiet form of self-sabotage, romanticizing a man who, in reality, couldn't meet your emotional needs. You start justifying his actions, overlooking the red flags, and minimizing your pain just to keep that fantasy alive. But real healing begins when you stop asking, "What if he changes?" and start asking, "Why am I holding on to someone who made me feel small, confused, or unworthy?" Letting go of the fantasy means confronting the uncomfortable truth that he may never have been who you hoped he would be. And while that's painful, it's also freeing. Because when you stop feeding the illusion, you finally create space for clarity, growth, and eventually, love that's rooted in reality. Living your reality means coming back to the present moment and anchoring yourself in what's actually happening. Instead of waiting for a text, you choose to silence your phone and focus on what brings you joy. Instead of checking his social media to see if he's moved on, you unfollow or mute him so your peace isn't constantly interrupted. You begin to invest in your own life, your passions, your friendships, your goals, because you realize your world doesn't have to revolve around his absence. Living in your reality means owning your story, without needing him to validate your pain or regret his choices. It's not about pretending you're okay when you're not. It's about being honest with yourself, feeling what you need to feel, and then deciding every day to choose yourself over a man who didn't. The more you ground yourself in reality, the more obvious it becomes that the fantasy version of him was never enough to sustain a real, fulfilling relationship. Maybe he was charming but inconsistent. Maybe he said all the right things, but his actions didn't match. Maybe he made you feel beautiful one day and invisible the next. These aren't flaws you can fix by loving harder. They're signs that the connection wasn't built on a foundation strong enough to last. And if it wasn't real, then letting go isn't a failure. It's a necessary act of self-respect. When you stop feeding the fantasy and start embracing your reality, everything begins to shift. Your energy changes. You become less available to people who waste your time. You stop waiting for closure from someone who never truly opened up in the first place. And without realizing it, your detachment starts to make him notice, because the version of you that was once waiting, wishing, and overanalyzing is now too busy building a life he no longer has access to. That's when regret creeps in. Not because you chased him, but because you finally stopped. Because nothing haunts someone more than realizing they were replaceable in the life of a woman who once gave them everything. And by living your truth, not your fantasy, you take the first real step toward the love you actually deserve. Letting go of someone you once cared deeply for is not a sign of weakness or failure. In fact, it's one of the most powerful and self-affirming moves you can make. Often, we hold on because we confuse love with loyalty, even when that loyalty is being poured into a one-sided connection. We keep fighting, overextending, compromising, and sacrificing until we're drained, emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically. But the truth is, the longer you hold on to someone who doesn't match your energy or effort, the more you delay your own growth. Letting go is not giving up, it's leveling up. It's choosing yourself when someone else has repeatedly shown they won't. Growth doesn't happen when everything is comfortable and familiar. It happens when you decide to walk away from what no longer serves you. That decision, while painful, is where your transformation begins. You start to reclaim your energy, your time, your focus. You shift the narrative from, "Why wasn't I enough for him?" to, "Why did I stay so long in a place that didn't recognize my worth?" That shift is everything. It's where healing starts and self-respect is rebuilt. It's not about revenge or hoping he regrets losing you. It's about recognizing that your peace is more important than his potential. The idea that he might change is one of the biggest traps. You convince yourself to stay because you see glimpses of who he could be, and you think if you love him enough, he'll rise to the occasion. But you cannot grow for someone else. You cannot do the emotional work for them. Waiting for him to change is like pausing your own evolution while hoping someone else catches up. And in the meantime, you're stalling your own progress. Letting go means accepting that his journey is not yours to manage. He has to meet you where you are. And if he can't or won't, it's not your job to drag him forward. The moment you release that weight, you begin to rise. You stop playing small just to keep someone else comfortable. You stop shrinking your standards to match what he's willing to give. And instead of obsessing over why it didn't work, you start focusing on everything you gained in walking away: self-awareness, boundaries, emotional independence. You learn to validate your own feelings without needing someone else's acknowledgement. That's where real confidence comes from, not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself even when it's hard. There's a power in detachment that can't be faked. When you genuinely stop caring about what he's doing, who he's with, or whether he regrets losing you, your entire energy changes. You become lighter, stronger, more centered. You start showing up for your own life in ways you couldn't when you were stuck in emotional limbo. And the irony is, that's when people start to notice. That's when he might look back and realize what he lost. But by then, you're not waiting for his regret. You've outgrown it. Letting go allows you to level up emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. You're no longer operating from a place of fear of being alone, fear of not finding someone better, fear of being misunderstood. Instead, you begin to operate from a place of self-trust. You know that anyone who truly deserves to be in your life will show up with clarity, consistency, and respect. And until then, you'd rather walk alone than walk beside someone who makes you feel alone in their presence. Letting go is the ultimate act of faith in yourself. It's a declaration that you are no longer willing to stay where love feels like pain and connection feels like confusion. You don't have to beg for clarity, chase validation, or earn affection. You simply have to rise, and the rest will either align or fall away. Closure is one of the most misleading concepts people cling to after a breakup. The idea that someone else needs to give you peace in order for you to move on is a trap that keeps you emotionally stuck. It creates the illusion that healing is something that can only happen when the other person admits they were wrong, apologizes, or gives you answers that finally make everything make sense. But more often than not, the person who hurt you isn't capable of giving you the closure you crave. They may not have the self-awareness, emotional maturity, or willingness to be honest. And even if they did, their words wouldn't undo the pain or change the outcome. Closure doesn't come from someone else validating your experience. It comes from within, from deciding that your peace matters more than understanding why he didn't choose you. The truth is, if he could give you real closure, he probably wouldn't have left you confused in the first place. The people who ghost, breadcrumb, lead on, or give mixed signals are usually the same people who avoid accountability. Expecting a clean, respectful goodbye from someone who treated you poorly during the relationship is like expecting consistency from someone who was never consistent. It keeps you in a cycle of waiting for a message, for clarity, for an explanation that might never come. And while you're waiting, you're giving away your power. You're letting him continue to dictate your emotional well-being long after the relationship is over. What you actually need isn't closure. You need standards. You need a clear understanding of what you will and won't tolerate. You need to draw a line, not because he gave you permission to move on, but because you gave yourself that permission. Standards are what protect you when your emotions try to drag you back into something familiar but unhealthy. They are the inner compass that says, even if I miss him, I won't chase someone who made me feel invisible. Or, even if I loved him, I won't beg for attention or clarity from someone who couldn't communicate like an adult. Standards remind you of your worth when your heart wants to forget. A person who truly values you won't leave you begging for closure. They won't disappear and expect you to figure it all out on your own. And if someone can walk away without explaining, that tells you more about their emotional capacity than anything else. That silence is your answer. That inconsistency is your closure. You just have to be willing to see it for what it is, instead of trying to turn it into something hopeful or meaningful. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is stop trying to decode someone who made it clear they weren't willing to meet you halfway. There's a freedom that comes when you stop waiting for an apology or explanation and start validating your own experience. You stop obsessing over what he thinks and start asking yourself what you deserve. You stop replaying conversations and start writing new chapters. You take the energy that was once spent trying to get him to understand you and pour it into understanding yourself. That's where healing happens, not in getting the perfect goodbye, but in giving yourself the kind of love and closure he never could. You begin to realize that closure isn't a door someone else has to open for you. It's a door you walk through on your own. When you're finally ready to leave behind the confusion, the waiting, and the hope that he'll someday become who you needed. Standards don't just help you close the chapter, they help you write a better one next time. They remind you that peace isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you protect by refusing to go back to someone who couldn't see your value the first time. After a breakup, especially one where you were left hurt, rejected, or confused, it's natural to want to prove your worth. You want him to see what he lost. You want him to regret walking away. And in that desire, many people turn to overcompensating, posting curated photos online, appearing happy, pretending to have moved on faster than they have, or even jumping into a rebound relationship just to spark jealousy. But when you're operating from a place of performance, your healing isn't genuine. It becomes an external show designed to provoke a reaction from someone who's no longer entitled to your energy. Real transformation, on the other hand, doesn't happen to get noticed. It happens when you focus inward, quietly and powerfully, and become the kind of person who no longer seeks validation from someone who couldn't value you properly in the first place. Healing in silence is one of the most underrated forms of growth. It's when you stop explaining yourself, stop seeking attention, and stop trying to manipulate how others perceive your journey. Instead of updating the world, or him, on how well you're doing, you just do it. You face your grief. You sit with your emotions. You get honest with yourself about your patterns, your wounds, and your self-worth. You begin to rebuild from the inside out, not to look good on the outside, but to feel whole again on the inside. That's the kind of healing no one can fake. And ironically, that's also what becomes most magnetic in the long run. The truth is, the strongest version of you won't need to be seen by him to be real. She doesn't need to parade her progress for him to regret letting her go, because his regret, if it comes, won't be triggered by your social media highlight reel. It'll come in those quiet moments when he realizes that your absence is no longer temporary, that the woman who used to try, who used to reach out, who used to give him endless chances, is now unreachable. Not out of spite, but because she simply doesn't live in the same emotional world anymore. You've grown past the version of yourself that tolerated crumbs, and now you're someone he wouldn't even know how to approach. Transformation is not about changing yourself so someone else will want you back. It's about evolving so fully that you no longer want someone who made you question your worth in the first place. That's the real shift. When the thought of him no longer pulls at your heart or rattles your peace, not because you forced yourself to forget, but because the new version of you has outgrown the pain, that's when you become truly untouchable. Not because you're pretending to be healed, but because you are. There's a subtle but profound difference between moving on to make a point and moving on because you found peace. One is about revenge, the other is about liberation. When you stop focusing on whether he sees your glow up and start living for yourself, you reclaim your power. You stop being the supporting role in his story and start being the main character in yours. And the version of you that emerges from that transformation is one that will never again settle for being an option, a convenience, or an afterthought. You don't need to prove anything to him. The woman you become by focusing inward, growing in silence, and healing deeply doesn't need to perform. Her energy speaks louder than any caption, any photo, any story. She is no longer motivated by making him regret, because by the time he does, she's already too far gone. And that's the most powerful outcome of all. When you decide to completely remove someone from your life after a breakup, it's one of the most decisive and empowering actions you can take. This isn't about petty revenge or playing games. It's about creating a boundary that protects your emotional well-being. Cutting off contact means no more wondering if he's thinking about you, no more waiting for a message that might never come, and no more opportunities for him to enter your life only to cause confusion or pain. It's a clean break that sends a clear, unspoken message here. You are no longer available for someone who failed to value you properly. This step requires courage because it forces you to accept that the relationship is truly over. But it's also the beginning of reclaiming your freedom. When you block or cut off someone, it's not just about the technology or the social media platforms. It's about reclaiming your mental space. Every time you scroll past his name or see his updates, it can reopen wounds or trigger emotions you're trying to heal. By removing that constant reminder, you reduce the chances of falling back into old patterns of obsession or longing. It's like clearing out a room full of clutter so you can breathe freely and focus on what truly matters: your growth, your happiness, your future. This act isn't selfish, it's self-respect. You deserve to move forward without unnecessary reminders of what hurt you. Sometimes people hesitate to block or cut off because they fear missing out on closure or the chance for reconciliation. But holding on to that hope keeps you tethered to a past that no longer serves you. Real closure isn't found in a final conversation or a message. It's found in the decision to stop investing your time and energy where it's not reciprocated. You don't owe him the chance to explain himself again, and you don't owe him your emotional availability once he's shown he can't be trusted with it. When you cut off contact, you stop giving him the power to disrupt your healing process. You become the guardian of your own peace. This step also teaches you a vital lesson about boundaries, about what you will and will not tolerate. It's a declaration that your emotional health comes first, that you are worthy of relationships that are consistent, respectful, and nurturing. Cutting off contact isn't about holding a grudge. It's about refusing to stay connected to someone who doesn't meet your needs or honor your worth. It's an act of kindness to yourself, a way of saying, I choose peace over pain, clarity over confusion, and respect over uncertainty. On the other side of this decision, you begin to rebuild your life on your terms, without the distraction or emotional drain of someone who didn't fully appreciate you. You can redirect your energy into yourself, your dreams, your passions, your friendships. This is where true healing happens, not in clinging to what's lost, but in creating something new. When you cut ties completely, you give yourself the chance to rediscover who you are outside of that relationship. You remember your value, your strengths, and your capacity for happiness independent of anyone else's approval or attention. Interestingly, the more you detach and fully cut off contact, the more you shift the dynamic from one of chasing to one of choosing. Instead of trying to win back someone who left, you choose yourself. And that choice changes everything. It shifts your mindset from scarcity to abundance, from fear to confidence. You stop needing validation from him or anyone else because you've become your own source of strength. That's where true empowerment lies. And if regret does come from him, it will not be because you begged, chased, or pleaded. It will be because you showed that you value yourself enough to walk away. You demonstrated that you won't settle for less than you deserve. In that space, his regret loses power over you because you are no longer available for the pain or confusion he might bring. You've drawn a clear line, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. That clarity and self-respect are the ultimate victories. In the end, forgetting he exists and letting him regret is not about bitterness or revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and choosing yourself above all else. It's about releasing the need for his validation and finding peace within your own truth. When you stop feeding the fantasy, let go of what no longer serves you, refuse to wait for closure from someone who won't give it, and fully commit to your own healing and growth, you become unstoppable. Your silence, your strength, and your self-respect will speak louder than any words ever could. And the greatest victory isn't in making him regret losing you. It's in knowing you never needed his approval to begin with. This is your moment to rise, to shine, and to create a life where you are truly seen, valued, and loved. By yourself first and foremost.